Our abbreviated, possibly inaccurate, but honest attempt at the history of Nardcore, 1981 to infinity. If we're attempting to be completists, we should probably mention a couple things before we get started in this overly ambitious project. There were two punk bands who played shows in the 805 in the 1970s. Some will argue that Public Enema from Napomo, California was the first. Unverified lore says they were formed in 76 or 77 and played shows around Goleta and Santa Barbara until calling it quits in 1979. The other was the Rotters. Formed by film students at Moorpark College, this group managed to put out a couple singles in 1978, with the first single, Sit on My Face Stevie Nicks, getting some play on Rodney Bingenheimer's K-Rock radio show, Rodney on the Rock. They'd also gained some notoriety in the late 1980s as one of the bands included in the first 4 LPs of the Killed by Death compilation series. While the Rotters get name-checked sometimes as the start of Nardcore, they're more the answer to a trivia question than a catalyst. The true catalyst for what would become Nardcore was a band called Aggression. Depending on who you ask, they formed in the late 70s or the early 1980s, but by 1981, they were already playing legit shows, both in Los Angeles and Oxnard. 1982 rolled around and more bands got rolling. February 12th, 1982 was Ill Repute's first show at the Port Hueneme Community Center. Also, many of the punk shows this year took place at the Goleta Valley Community Center up in Goleta. 1982 was also the first year a Nardcore band would find its way onto vinyl. That year, the Better Youth organization released an LP titled Someone Got Their Head Kicked In that featured 3 Aggression songs. They would also do a full US tour that year with Battalion of Saints from San Diego. Ill Repute's Clean Cut American Kid would also appear on the Rodney on the Rock Volume 3 compilation that came out in 1982. It should be noted how often some of these bands were playing Los Angeles. Clubs like Godzilla's in North Hollywood, Cathay de Grande in Hollywood, the T-Bird Rollerdrome in Whittier, and Lazzaro's and the Olympic Auditorium in Los Angeles played host to Nardcore bands in 1982. At this point, we should probably also mention what Nardcore is. It's simply a mashup of the words Oxnard and hardcore. The story is that one day some dudes were listening to the album Hardcore 1981 by DOA, and someone said, "If this is hardcore, we're Nardcore." Then they ran with it. The term Nardcore went on to categorize all the hardcore and punk bands from the Oxnard and surrounding areas, stretching from Santa Barbara to Simi Valley. By 1983, the scene was in full swing. Shows in Santa Barbara started happening out of La Casa de la Raza. This club would host shows off and on all the way through the present day. 1983 also saw Casa Tropical at the Oxnard Airport start doing shows. Oxnard was now playing host to some of the biggest punk bands of the time. 1983 also saw 4 notable releases. Aggression released their first LP, Don't Be Mistaken, on BYO Records. Ill Repute released their first 7-inch, Oxnard, The Land of No Toilets, on Mystic Records. Also, 2 compilations featured Nardcore bands. The We Got Power compilation LP came out on Mystic Records featuring Dr. No, Ill Repute, and Stalag 13. Also, a compilation called Life is Beautiful, So Why Not Eat Health Foods came out on New Underground Records and featured MIA from Ventura. The Nardcore bands continued pounding the pavement, playing shows all over California, from NorCal to Los Angeles to San Diego. Ill Repute and False Confession even played Tijuana, Mexico in 1983. The fanzine 60 Miles North was also started this year by Mike Rogers to document the Nardcore scene. 1984 is generally considered the most prolific year for Nardcore. All the major bands put out new music this year. Ill Repute released their 12-inch What Happens Next on Mystic Records. Stalag 13 released their 12-inch In Control on Upstart Records. Dr. No released their 12-inch Plug In Jesus on Ghetto Way Records. RKL released their 7-inch It's a Beautiful Feeling on Mystic Records. False Confession released their self-titled 7-inch on Mystic Records. And the Nardcore compilation LP was released on Mystic Records, featuring new music from Aggression, Scared Straight, RKL, Ill Repute, Stalag 13, and more. Casa Tropical had what may have been its final show on January 18th, 1984, with TSOL, Ill Repute, and Major Disturbance. La Casa de la Raza was still going strong, and there were a bunch of shows in Santa Barbara that year. Solid Gold at Wagon Wheel and the Town and Country Bar on Wainimi Road both had punk shows that year. All the major Nardcore bands played these two clubs in 1984. Aggression and Dr. No both did tours in 1984. All of the bands continued to play all over as much as they could. 1985 gave us more notable releases. The Dr. No Burn 7-inch on Mystic Records. The Aggression self-titled LP on Mystic Records. The Rat Pack self-titled 7-inch on Mystic Records. The Scared Straight self-titled 7-inch on Mystic Records. And RKL's seminal LP, Keep Laughing on Mystic Records. Also, I guess at this point we should mention Doug Moody and Mystic Records. Many bands who are on Mystic have mixed feelings about the label and the royalties, paid or unpaid. RKL even depicted Doug Moody getting his neck cranked on their 1989 release, Revenge is a Beautiful Feeling. In 1985, Ill Repute and Scared Straight went on tour together, with Scott Radinsky of Scared Straight doing double duty, also playing drums for Ill Repute. The bands made it to Pittsburgh, where their van got jacked along with the equipment. The Nard Curse had made its first major appearance. Dr. No and RKL also toured this year more successfully. Casa de la Raza continued to do shows up in Santa Barbara. And the Red Barn in Isla Vista started doing shows as well. By 1986, things were changing. Dr. No and Stalag 13 were going more metal. Ill Repute slowed down. Tony and John experimented with a rap project, then John went off to guitar school. Dr. No did a US tour, and RKL were playing a lot of shows all over. Aggression and Habeas Corpus also did a US tour that year. There were shows at the Officers Club at the Camarillo Airport, at the Red Barn and People's Park in Isla Vista, and at the Skate Palace in Port Hueneme. 1986 also gave birth to Fred Hammer's It's Alive fanzine.